watching Shalom TV, celebrating Jewish culture. Funding for Shalom TV has been provided by the following. And by viewers like you.
Once again, we have the wonderful pleasure of sitting with the Executive Vice Chairman of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations, Malcolm Hoenlein. Malcolm, thanks for squeezing us in.
My pleasure.
Malcolm, you just came back from Washington, where the President's Conference met with the President of the United States. First of all, how did the meeting come about?
We asked for it.
Why now? What prompted it?
Well, we didn't actually ask for it at this particular week, but we have been in discussion with them for some time about a meeting with the President, with the members of the Conference of Presidents, something that has been done over the last 40 years with regularity. And the White House agreed. We had there the presidents of most of the member organizations.
Was everyone invited?
Every one of the member organizations.
So anybody who didn't show was on them, in essence?
Absolutely. It was
Okay.
there. A couple had a national convention that week. Some were traveling, but it was either the president or the national executive director of the member organizations were all invited to be there.
So roughly how many came?
There were about 50 people.
Virtually the entire conference was represented.
A couple were there.
Okay.
And we had more than an hour meeting with the president. We also had meetings before that with Dennis Ross and Dan Shapiro of the National Security Council. We met with the acting Undersecretary of the Treasury to talk about Iran sanctions at the Department of Treasury, and then we met with the Republican and Democratic leaders of the House, including the Speaker, Boehner and Eric Cantor and Steny Hoyer and others, after the meeting with the President. But obviously that was the highlight, and he was very generous with his time. He took questions, maybe 7, 8 questions. They were very respectful. There have been press reports about characterizing the meeting. I think that are totally false. Look,
how would you characterize it?
First of all, I think it's a unique privilege when the President of the United States spends an hour with a constituent group. I think it was a respectful exchange. He was warm, he was joking throughout the meeting. He made an opening statement. It was very thoughtful. It was not, he's knowledgeable. He didn't consult people. He answered the questions. I don't think he played to the audience. There were differences. There were issues that he knew. And he said that, I know you may disagree with some tactical decisions, but we are all in agreement. He made very strong commitments about maintaining Israel's qualitative edge, about the foreign aid. He described Israel as America's best friend in the world. He talked about the nature of the U.S.-Israel relationship, the values that bond, as well as the values of the American Jewish community. I think he articulated the views. He talked about the changes in the region. He talked about Iran as a major threat. We're not going to discuss the specifics because that's one of the understandings, that we don't quote the president and what he said, so that we can have an ongoing dialogue in confidence.
What did he say about settlements?
Very
what
little,
was the tone? Little.
It was not a major issue.
Okay. Was the UN veto, the U.S. veto in the UN discussed at all?
Sure. And, look, the president made a decision. It probably was not an easy decision. It was the right decision. It should be easy based on the merits, but it's not always easy based on the politics and the fact that you have 14 cowards sitting in the Security Council falling in line that would have supported this resolution.
And again, we should remind the audience what the resolution was.
Well, the resolution was a Palestinian and Arab initiative that sought to criticize Israel singularly, condemning the settlements, describing them as illegal. And when a Security Council resolution is enacted, it has legal consequences. Mm-hmm. A statement by the president of the Security Council that was offered to them does not, nor does a General Assembly resolution, which has moral standing perhaps and can be exploited, but it doesn't have the weight or the gravitas or the legal implication of a Security Council resolution. And this resolution, had it passed, would not only have distorted reality, it's a one-sided condemnation, it's completely distortive of the fact that the Palestinians have consistently and until today refused direct negotiations, and it's part of their larger strategy to bypass negotiations by trying to have a solution imposed, by having the Security Council, Europeans and others start to dictate the outcomes of the current problems, and to impose, whether it's borders or addressing right of refugees and issues, which he does not want to negotiate because he is not prepared to make any concessions. And he is walking away from every effort Netanyahu has made, and frankly, he doesn't get credit for the steps that he has taken, from his speech at Bar Ilan, where he talked about a two-state solution, lifting a lot of the blockades and the barriers and other things in the West Bank, increasing economic cooperation, security cooperation. I mean, Israel has done so many things, and the Prime Minister keeps offering new concessions and new concessions, only to get slapped around. And the fact is that there is largely a freeze in place on the settlements. There are many people who object to that, but
In Israel.
And he has to fight, on the one hand, his own coalition and the parties who are saying, what are we getting for all of this? So you might as well build, you might as well do what we're entitled to do. And frankly, no administration has called the settlements illegal since, I think, 1979. So instead they used the terms illegitimate, and the statement that was issued at the time was considered very harsh, and many people were critical of Ambassador Rice's statement at the time of explaining the vote. But the bottom line is that the president is the one who exercised the veto. It was he who endorsed it, and I know there was opposition to that decision within his own administration. So we expressed appreciation for it, but also concern about unilateralism on the part of the Palestinians.
How troubling is it to you that there actually were those in the administration who thought the United States should not exercise its veto?
It's very troubling, and especially troubling because some of those people are people who have taken different positions in the past. I have no clue what motivates it, because on every stand, I have visited the Middle East now several times in the last couple of months. I've met with Arab leaders here and there. There's none of them who wants to see a weak Israel. The opposite. They tell us that one of the key things for them is to see strong American involvement. They want reassurances, they want things, but they also talk about Israel. And you don't see, the demonstrators carrying death to Israel signs or death to America, contrary to what everybody said. And after the veto, you didn't have the, quote, explosion that those who advocated not using the veto warned about. There was virtually nothing, because that's not the issue. They're worried about internal issues, they're worried about other things. And frankly, for many of them, they want to see the United States take strong stands because they want them to take strong stands in regard to them as well. And we've seen the exploitation of a lot of the myths that the Palestinian-Israeli issue is the core, and if you solve that, all these other things will go away, and all the problems, the tensions in the region. Well, quite the opposite. We see that it's unrelated to the Palestinian-Israeli issue. It should be resolved. We want to see it resolved. But it is not the cornerstone. It is not what drives Iran. It is not the way that if somehow you solve the Palestinian-Israeli issue, you will be able to deal with Iran. Quite the contrary. We see now Iran is behind a lot of the mischief. They're exploiting and waiting to exploit the situations that are going on in the Middle East. So a lot of the mythology that's been created and has become sort of a commonplace understanding of events in the Middle East, we now see that that is not true. It is important to work for peace. We want to see peace. The Israelis and Prime Minister Netanyahu is now talking about taking steps to move new initiatives. But he doesn't have a partner because his partner does not want to negotiate. He's afraid of Hamas. He's afraid of his own thing. He's facing elections in September. He's not going to make any concessions or even hint at concessions before those elections. I don't know if he will afterwards. We don't know what the outcome of the elections, first municipal and then presidential. So, the rationale of what would have happened if we had exercised that veto, if we did not exercise the veto, of those who were advocating that position, I think the consequences would have been very negative for the U.S. They would have seen, again, the U.S. is not a reliable ally. And, excuse me, the understanding in the Middle East is that if Israel, whom they believe controls Washington, has all these ties and everything else, If they can't rely on America, how could anybody else?
Where did Dennis Ross stand?
Dennis, I am sure, was for the veto. He's somebody who understands the Middle East uniquely. He's been involved in it for decades. I'm very thankful that he's in the National Security Council.
You know, there have been times since President Obama has been elected that there seems to have been tension between the administration and the Jewish community and the administration and Israel. And in fact, there were people who were heads of organizations in the President's Conference who have spoken out, who have published, and at a given point in time, both you and Alan Solo expressed some concern. So one of the things that I was wondering was whether this meeting in any way made you more comfortable overall with where you feel the Obama administration stands vis-a-vis Israel.
Well, first of all, I think the communication is very important in and of itself. The opportunity to exchange ideas with the President of the United States, who listened calmly, who listened and answered in a very respectful way, and questions were posed in a respectful way. I think that in and of itself is very important. We've always had differences with administrations, even with those that are classified today as the most friendly ever. If you remember now, as we celebrate the 100th anniversary of Ronald Reagan's birth, we had the AWACS fight with him. We had Bitburg. You had other issues, even though the relationship is idealized now, and everybody puts that on the side and focuses on the fact that what a great friend he indeed was. So we always have tensions. The question is, what is the ultimate policy? What when the chips are down, where do they stand? And questions have been raised about that, I know, and that there are people commentators, others, critics, you have splits within the Democratic Party, you have splits between Republicans and Democrats, and every issue becomes politicized. But one of the tests was about the veto to me, and the fact that the President came down on the right side of that issue was very important. I think the assurances he gave about maintaining Israel's qualitative edge, about Israel's security,
You're talking about militarily, I assume.
Militarily, about many other things, and about crushing any effort to delegitimize Israel, and the terminology he used, and I think that those are important reassurances. And the issues where we differ, we have to discuss, and we can help educate each other. We have to understand. Look, we know the United States has many interests in the region that they have to take into account. The question is, do they read those right? And do we read them right? So by a dialogue, you help come to some common understanding.
You and I spoke after a prior meeting with the Jewish community and the administration, in which J Street was invited. In essence, they didn't do this through the President's Conference. This has a different tone to it. First of all, was J Street at this meeting?
No.
Okay. Do you feel this signals also a different understanding? Has there been growth in your mind in terms of the understanding within the Obama administration for the relationship it has with Israel and the Jewish community here in America?
I think that there is a recognition inherent in the fact that the invitation was extended to the Conference of Presidents. It's a recognition that the community has a structure. And we never said it represents everybody or everybody's point of view, but we have everybody from Peace Now to ZOA with all the views in between, Orthodox, Reform, Conservative, Reconstructionists. Everybody sits around one table. It is the only form of its kind. And the community has a structure. You can choose to bypass it. Others have as well. Sometimes there's smaller meetings. I mean, the leadership of the conference, the chairman and myself, have always been included. But this was a statement to the entire conference. And I think it was an important one.
Yes, I agree, and I wanted to make sure that our audience understood that. So I want to ask you to comment about an editorial that was printed. A columnist actually wrote a piece in the Washington Times. Jeffrey Cooner wrote this piece, in which his point was, and it expresses a view in the Jewish community, that even though the United States vetoed the attempt to call the settlements illegal, the United States has said to the Palestinians that it would have supported a UN resolution calling the settlements and continued settlement activity by Israel on the West Bank illegitimate. Not illegal, but illegitimate. And Kuhner's point is that although this is not really a break with American foreign policy, there have been other presidents and other administrations that have referred to the settlements as illegitimate. Saying that they would do this in a formal UN resolution is a formal kind of criticism of the State of Israel that prior administrations have not done. To what extent is he right?
Well,
to what
we've had
extent
criticism. We've had criticism in the past
in the United Nations?
in the United Nations and elsewhere. Second of
So
all,
Kuhner is
but we've
factually
had,
wrong.
But we had presidential statements. We've had President's Security Council. We've met on other things. Second, I don't know that they would have accepted it just with the change of word illegitimate, illegal, because the United States criticized and said the reason for their opposition is that they don't believe that the UN is the forum for this discussion. They didn't say it about the substance so much as about the process and the fact that the Palestinians want to avoid negotiations and are going to the UN to bypass discussions with Israel directly. And so you have a much more fundamental objection on the part that the administration has expressed and should express, because it is a way to sabotage talks and to utilize the UN in this forum to gain recognition and then to move next September and say, well, we have this resolution, we'll go for the next resolution. Second, I don't know that the change of the one word would have made the difference, because their objection was to it being one-sided, that there was no recognition of the problems on the other side, and there's been those long-standing Negroponte principles, they called it, for Ambassador Negroponte, that the U.S. would veto resolutions that were one-sided, that were imbalanced, that were not taking into account, for instance, when Israel responded to a terror attack, if it didn't mention a terror attack, the United States wouldn't accept it. The fact is this administration has not had to exercise the veto there on these issues till now, so it gets more prominence. But if you remember, previous administrations were also doing it quite frequently.
In your mind, then, is Kuhner's whole point misplaced? Is it improper to say that the administration now is taking positions vis-a-vis Israel that are, what he said, almost unprecedented?
Look, I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't dismiss the entire argument. I think that, and I would have hoped the United States should have right away made it clear to the Palestinians, there's a veto. We're not going to go along with this. Forget it. But you have to look at the motivation of the Palestinians in this as well. They wanted to embarrass the United States and Israel. They wanted to force a veto rather than get the package that was offered to them was incredible. The United States, up to the last minute, and frankly, I found the package objectionable, which
Remind
was
us what the package was.
A statement by the President of the Security Council, which would have used very harsh language against Israel, a statement by the quartet that would have talked about 67 borders, we're told, and a delegation from the Security Council going to the region, which would have been a propaganda show. And they turned it down, which shows you the real intent of the Palestinians. It had nothing to do with getting a resolution. They were interested in making a stand, playing to their own street, and the Arabs who pushed it hoped to divert attention from the internal demonstrations against the governments by deflecting it onto Israel and to the more
But are you
important
saying
United
the
States.
administration would have accepted that?
Would have accepted the package? Yes.
Yes.
The United States
And
proposed
that does
it.
bother you?
Of course it bothers me, because I think the package would have been very detrimental. I think having this series of statements, and even didn't have the legal weight and significance of a Security Council resolution, and it certainly has morals and political implications that would have been exploited by the Palestinians, and could have been had they accepted it. Why they didn't, I think, fits the pattern of past experience with the Palestinians.
Was this raised during your meeting with the president?
The package was not the veto. We did discuss the veto, but we had private conversations with administration officials before and after about it.
Did they make you feel any better? Because you've made a very important point here. On the one hand, you tell us that this meeting gave you a real positive sense, but you are identifying a very serious problem that could have developed, and it was only because the Palestinians didn't accept it that we sort of avoided this kind of problem.
Well, the United States did not want to have to exercise the veto, and especially the fact that none of the Europeans were on board and that they all didn't abstain. They voted for the resolution, 14.
To me, this whole thing is so frightening.
It's the whole scenario about and the president did speak about the isolation of Israel as of concern to him, and talked about Merkel and Cameron, and he said these are friends, and when they move in this direction, so that was the context in which he said we got to look and think about Israel's relationship in the world as a whole. That's a legitimate point. I mean, we are concerned about the isolation of Israel. We're very concerned about the delegitimization, which the president addressed as well. But the package, in and of itself, would have been of concern. And the UN continues to be focused on one party, and we're meeting with UN officials and preparing for meetings right now as we speak. That the UN doesn't change. We see the Human Rights Council praised Libya in their annual report, talked about Egypt's human rights. Guys like Stephen Walt of Walt and Mearsheimer wrote about how Libya is really not what they think. It's a great liberal society, et cetera, and all the things all of which clearly have been proven false, and we knew were false. But this obsession with Israel, the single focus, and the willingness of others to go along with that, to avoid their own issues. I understand why the Arabs did it. As I said, they wanted to divert attention. They thought you would be able to get the heat off of them and onto Israel. And it didn't happen. You saw there wasn't that kind of response, because that's not what the agenda is. And the Europeans traditionally are just cowards.
You've said, though, that there were people in the administration who do take positions vis-a-vis the Middle East that do trouble you. I assume those are the ones who would have supported
Absolutely.
America's going along with this package. Mm-hmm. And I guess the only other question to ask you is, did you have a sense that the president would have gone along with it with a certain kind of enthusiasm that troubles you?
Because they weren't enthusiastic about this tactic on the part of the Palestinians. They have repeatedly denounced the tactic of going for unilateral action, going to the UN and not engaging in negotiations, saying the UN is not the place for this to be taking place.
Malcolm, are the settlements illegal?
No. It's been. You can criticize them, and you can say that you feel that they are, impediments or whatever. The truth is that if you know the real numbers and the real statistics, that they take up, a single-digit percentage of the land, that in fact there really is a freeze in place, and now we've seen the Prime Minister acknowledging that there's essentially a freeze to take place. We saw from the leaks of the things that the Palestinians recognize that most of this area is going to remain with Israel. So what's the difference if they build there or not?
One of the arguments president did say that to you, did he not?
Yes, and one of the arguments the president made is, so let's get to that. So then whatever future construction takes place, it'll be clear that this is within the area staying with Israel. If that's not, it will be easier for Israel to do it.
Okay. You've said no, the settlements are not illegal. Are they illegitimate?
By some people's definitions, I guess, I don't know what illegitimate means. I know what an illegitimate child is. I don't know how a settlement, these were built on government land. There has been no expropriation of land for decades. The fact is that all the construction is within the footprint, the existing footprint. They're not moving beyond it. And the freeze affects, I saw it when we visited Ariel. They can't put a water pipeline. You see half-built buildings they can't complete. You see a porch that was under construction, and they have to stop. That's what you're really talking about. So and it's unnatural to say that there will be a freeze, because and the Palestinians are continuing to construct illegally everywhere, including East Jerusalem. Huge amounts of construction that go on, and we don't hear any criticism, anybody saying that that's changing the status quo. Settlements are an issue. The whole territorial issue will be resolved in negotiations. People have a general understanding that the big blocks will remain, and et cetera, and the rest will be negotiated. But Israel, you have to remember how Israel came into the territories. It didn't come in there as a conquering force because it wanted to. It came in response to an attack in an area that Jordan illegally occupied also over the 20 years till 48 to 67, recognized only by England and Pakistan. Much of the land was government-owned land. And when people go, and I just was there with a group, and you travel around and you see that the barren hilltops, one after another, and then comes a community, a village, a city. Some of them are 10 and 20, 30,000 people like Ma'ale Adumim. They're not, little encampments. And you see it doesn't encroach. It's not, all the rest of the area around them are largely uninhabited. There are some areas where they're built close to population centers. And, frankly, all of this can be resolved. It's not essential that there has to be a conflict over this. What's incredibly important is that we keep recognizing that those who try to push a one-state solution are proposing something which will be the death knell for Israel. That those who obstruct the chances, the Palestinians, the continued incitement, the actions that they take, are all going to mitigate against any chance for peace. And the people will be the ones who suffer for it.
This is the first time I've had a chance to speak with you after the, quote, revolution in Egypt. I'm asking two questions of Malcolm Hoenlein. Number one, what was your reaction in general to it? And when you've talked to Israeli leaders, what's your sense of their concerns, if there are any, about what will happen to the Egyptian-Israeli relationship as a result of the fall of Hosni Mubarak?
Two very important questions, and it's also true for Tunisia, and what's going on in Algeria and Yemen and Bahrain and Oman now, and all the Jordan, Lebanon. It's an area in change. It's a volcano, and it's still erupting. And we don't know what the ultimate outcome will be. We don't know where the lava is going to flow, how many more aftershocks there will be. We don't know. And anybody says that they know what the outcome will be. I've spoken to Egyptian leaders since the uprising. They don't know. They have a lot of concerns. There are huge obstacles to overcome. What will be the role of the Muslim Brotherhood? There are people who dismiss it. There are people who exaggerate it. The fact is, it's significant, and you can't dismiss it. You got to recognize that they will exploit this situation, and if they got 20% in the election where they were restricted, they could get 30, 40, and because they're one of the only organized parties, that and the Mubarak's old party. So it takes time to develop. Democracy is not an event. It's a process. It's not something that you just declare one day. As one Arab leader said to me, it's not a medicine that you take and all of a sudden now you're a democracy. And you have to have the infrastructure. So when they talk about pushing parliamentary elections, they don't have the parties to it, which means that the established opposition will have an advantage. So I'm very concerned because this is Israel's biggest neighbor. It's a game changer if it goes the wrong way. If it goes to true democracy, it's a very positive move. Democracies don't go to war. They resolve issues other ways. They will continue to reign in Hamas. They will face this reality. Right now, they're worried about an Islamist state in northern Sinai. They see the threat from Gaza against them as much as against Israel. They know that Iran has its hands in there and everywhere else in the Middle East, which it can exploit, and is moving towards its hegemonic goals. So what happened there was shocking. There are many questions about how the West should have reacted. Did they react quickly enough? Did they react too quickly? Should they have stood by Mubarak more? What if he had crushed it the first day? Would he put an end to it? There are a lot of unanswered questions which historians will debate. The fact is that this could be a very healthy development if it's managed the right way, if it's directed the right way, if we don't put unreasonable expectations or try to impose our type of democracy on them. It has to be their kind of democracy. And those who argue, well, Arabs not capable of it, everybody wants democracy, everybody wants freedom. You have to take into account cultural effects, the tribal divisions, the many other things that will impact what the ultimate outcome. Israelis are very concerned. They're concerned because they worry that Gaza, now open with huge influx of weapons, 40,000 prisoners escaped, including many terrorists and many Hamas leaders, many Islamist leaders, and Hezbollah included. And the Hezbollah guys went and liberated one of those, quote, prisons and then burnt it down. So some of them came back to Gaza, so you have some of the more radical people having come back. They're very worried that an economic collapse, other things will lead to an end or an abrogation of the Camp David Accords, to the stopping the gas flow. The economic intricacies of the relationship through the qualified industrial zones, etc., are very important to Egypt, important to Israel. Tourism from Israel is a big factor in Egypt, and their tourism industry has been decimated. So while there's an outer calm, still beneath the surface, there are a lot of rumblings, and this is far from over. We're far from sure the direction there. I think we have to look at Central Asia and help prevent things from happening there. These are great allies of ours with huge resources that Iran sees as a very juicy target. I think Kuwait, Bahrain has always been their target, and they've stimulated the Shiite population in the past against the Sunni government. And just across the river is the eastern province of 16 miles away of Saudi Arabia, with a big Shiite population and the energy reserves, the oil reserves.
What's the mood right now and the tone in Israel? And I ask this, Malcolm, also because there are American Jews who've been planning to take vacations and visit Israel. In any way, is this the wrong time to visit Israel?
Oh, no, 100% not. We were just there with the whole President's Conference, 110 people. It was amazing. The weather was great. The things we saw, we went on tours in some of the new archaeological sites, but every time, and I go to Israel very often, there's always so much new in this little place. It's unbelievable. So number one, absolutely they should go. Tourism is vital. Tourism is going into record numbers in Israel last year, hopefully this year. Secondly, the mood is one of confusion. They don't, because they're concerned. For them, this is not a distant problem. This is their neighbor. And they're concerned about Jordan. Instability in Jordan, great impact on Israel. We see that the king's supporters are angry at his Palestinian wife, think she has too much influence. Then you have a 2/3 Palestinian population which is rested. So that is very important. They have to look at Hezbollah and what's happening in Lebanon, where you have a stalemate, where Hezbollah's brought down the government while their prime minister was sitting with the president of the United States. The huge buildup. We went to the border with Syria and Lebanon, and you literally look and you can see the Hezbollah guys there. You literally see them through the binoculars. Who sit at an army base, but it's, spitting distance if you're a good spitter. And so for Israel, all of these things have immediate ramifications, not long term. And the instability, is usually exploited by these extremist elements. They're all waiting for it. And we saw in Lebanon how people who were dismissive and said, oh, Hezbollah will be a minor party, it's going to become a political party, it's not a terrorist organization. We see what remains. And so this is really a question of stay tuned, because every day there are going to be new developments, new changes, every hour sometimes. And nobody today can tell you what the outcome will be in any of the countries. Tunis, stalemated all this time. Egypt, we'll have to see. The military, there'll be changes. Some of the officials, I think the prime ministers, other, will go as they move towards this period. And the army doesn't want to stay in charge, yet they are the main stabilizing factor.
Okay, and in terms of what you're feeling inside, we've talked about this before, you consider your job is you to be a professional worrier for the Jewish community.
Right.
At the moment, if there was a worry meter that could tell us how you were feeling, where are you right now in terms of anxiety about the Middle East or relative calm within you?
If you ask me my inner feeling, it's indigestion probably, because when you know a little, it can be very dangerous. And when you know a little bit more than a little, it's even more dangerous in this circumstance, because you know what the implications of some of these things are. And because I have access to people in the countries and try to maintain current information on everything that's going on, it's a very troubling period. I look, people ask me, are you concerned about the domino effect? I said, I'm much more worried about the monopoly effect, because, dominoes you can deal with. Monopoly is much harder. And the monopoly in this case is Iran. They have their hands in a lot of these situations, and look how they move towards their goal without firing a single shot. They don't have to worry about nuclear weapons, not even conventional. With the government of Iraq, Syria, their stronghold, Lebanon, where Hezbollah has taken over, Gaza, where obviously Hamas backed by them. They always wanted to target and bring down the government of Bahrain. They are active in Africa. They're active in South America. They're active in Asia. They are certainly a party to the problems in Yemen. In all of these situations, Morocco broke diplomatic relations, Senegal, Chad, because they found that they were interfering, supplying weapons, doing other things to destabilize regimes everywhere. And now with the price of oil going up, it means that they've had billions and billions of dollars, maybe tens of billions in fact, of added income. The sanctions are working, they're having an impact. Unfortunately, Turkey gives them an out to bypass it somewhat, but the bottom line is that when they don't have access to the dollar and euro, they're in big trouble. And that is the case today. So the sanctions are working in the energy and banking sector, but it's not enough. We see that they're moving ahead on their nuclear program, but more than that, they're moving ahead in spreading their influence and destabilizing it. The violations of human rights, executing, people every 8 hours for the first month in January. There've been more and more executions now. Where's the outcry? Where's everybody? The president did address this in his meetings with us and said that they make much more of an issue of Iran. He talked about his real concern about Iran's nuclear program, and described it as, I think, the #1 threat. But while everybody's attention is diverted, they're moving ahead.
You continue to do extraordinary work for the Jewish community, for the State of Israel, and for the American scene, and it is always so lovely that you give me time and share your insight with our audience. Thank you, Malcolm. Thank you. And those were the thoughts of Malcolm Hoenlein, Executive Vice Chairman of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations. As always, we invite you to be in touch with us with any thoughts or comments to the ideas that Malcolm expressed. And if you want to be in touch with Malcolm directly, you can do so through me. If you email me, I will forward your emails on to him. Email me, write me, put stuff on my Facebook wall, tweet me. I look forward to hearing from you. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who can send a tax-deductible contribution of $36 or more to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media to help support our programming. Tax-deductible checks may be made out to GEM and mailed to GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. Please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD, and we thank you for your kind support.